webinar series, we'll be tackling the tricky topic of understanding what are the right metrics to use within accounts, and more specifically, how at differing levels of context within an account, those preferred metrics vary. For those of you active in the Twitter universe, the hashtag for today's event is customer metrics, and you're certainly encouraged to tweet about what you're hearing. To share insights from a buyer's perspective of understanding customer metrics, I welcome back the host of the webinar series, Chairman and co-founder of Executive Conversation, Jim Melillo. Jim brings a broad career of CFO experience with both private and publicly held accounts, as well as experience in treasury, mergers and acquisitions, and financing. Our session today will run about 30 minutes, after which we'll take as many of your questions as we have time to account for. Please enter your questions as they arise during the presentation in the Q&A box on your screen. Jim, without further ado, let me turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Eric, and let's get started by, first of all, saying, as many of you know, the Executive Conversation founders are from the Northeast, from New York myself. We have friends, family, and customers back there. And so as part of this, we have made a donation for every person attending to the Red Cross, and we have also put the redcross.org up here for anyone that would also like to do it. So today you get a chance to not only enjoy a packed session, but more importantly, you have the opportunity to make a donation. Just text to Red Cross 90999 and $10 will be sent to them. So let's get started with, as we always do, a poll. And here's a tough one. Working with a new client, and they say to us, you know, wicality is a critical metric for us. You're talking to Howard Schultz, CEO of Starbucks, Ed Goldfinger, CFO of Zipcar, Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix, or Daniel Schwartz, CFO of Burger King. Which one of these people is wicality important to? You have your polls in front of you. As you know, these only last 15 seconds. Your chance to put that down. We all know Starbucks, Zipcar, a rent-a-car by the hour, Netflix, a company that sends us by post or online series of movies and television series. Great. Poll is closed. And so what we're going to do is take a look at the results. And my guess is that this time we're going to have a greater smattering of percentages compared to ones where the answer is quite obvious. So, Eric, if you would, what numbers did we get for A, B, C, and D?
Proving to be one of the more difficult polls that we've run in this series, and the answers actually mirror probably who is most well known out there. Top of the list, Howard Schultz, CEO of Starbucks, at 41%, followed by the Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix, 33%, Daniel Schwartz, CFO of Burger King, at 14%, and last but not least by any stretch, Ed Goldfinger, CFO of Zipcar, came in dead last at 12%.
Well, I think Ed would be sad to know that his view of the way the world works is actually the answer here. And I think Eric is absolutely correct. A lot of times when people come and talk to me based on who they think I am, gee, must be from Howard Schultz, he's a smart guy because he's in the news all the time, they think that that's an appropriate metric. Zipcar actually, for those of you that don't know, is a company that rents urban 2- and 4-door cars by the hour to urban and some suburban dwellers. And what they have found out, and that's where they came up with this wicality, is that cyclical or even monthly or even cycles that are predetermined are not sufficient for their business. And so Ed Goldfinger came up with this concept of wicality because he began to realize he needed to break down the rental business into hour by hour and week by week. And the demand for his cars on a Tuesday night was extremely low compared to Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock when everybody wants to go shopping and needs a car to haul their stuff. And he began pricing the structure of the business around that. And so you can go out for an evening movie date dinner quite cheaply on a Tuesday night and you will pay a premium to go pick up your groceries in a rented car for 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon. Weekality, a great metric. And that's what today is about. Today is about your understanding my great metrics. And the reason they're great is because they determine how I, through dozens of years, have figured out what it takes to turn my company around, what it takes to continue to be number one, what it takes to take market share. And many times, you will have metrics that don't fall within that. You have products, services, software that impact my business, but I don't care about that. If I'm in a business of driving cash flow, and you are in a business of talking to me about how to grow revenue, you know, there is a relationship between growing revenue and cash flow. But I can make just as many cases for where growing revenue will actually reduce my cash flow for at least 12 to 24 months, and thus these metrics don't mean anything to me. There's another series of things that I have that are important metrics for me, and you can't impact them. And so today we're going to talk about this area in here, your ability to impact my metrics with your abilities to have a chance to change that. And that change comes about the way you express it. So let's start with a few ratios, a few of the metrics. There are some common ones: return on sales, my margin; return on equity, something that shareholders and CEOs all care about; cash flow, again, we talked a little bit about that; increasing the amount of cash. You know, cash flow was taught to me as a very simple method. It's what we call cigar box accounting. What it means is in the beginning of the year, you look in the cigar box and see how much cash you have. During the year, you run your business. At the end of the year, on December 31st, you open up the cigar box and you count how much cash is left. It's a simple way of thinking about how do I make sure there's more cash in that cigar box by the end of the year than there was at the beginning. Selling off assets is one simple way of doing it. It's a short-term fix. Collecting receivables, a better idea. Then within our industry, we drive metrics that we want you to focus on that are specific. So we've got sales per square foot or gross margin per square foot here in our retail business. How does your product change that number? Error rates in healthcare. Fascinating, there are now approximately 30+ errors that will no longer be reimbursed as of last month. It amazes me that one of them is that if the surgeon leaves his watch inside of you, he can no longer charge you to get his watch back out. Now this, of course, I find to be a fascinating metric, A, based on one, that the government would have to tell hospitals that they can't charge for this, and B, that hospitals in the past have charged for their made errors. And there's now 30 of them that are tracked. Average revenue per user, this is also known as ARPU. And again, this was one that grew through the telecom business as they began to realize that maintaining users was critical. And then there is the triple metric, and this is what we'll focus on. The triple metric basically talks about how you begin to link from the project level all the way to the corporate level within my organization, specific to my industry, specific to what is important to me. I am always astonished that people do not see these relationships as you bring your project to me. When you bring that project to me, this is what we, as an organization, focus on. It's the triple metric. You can't get funding from me as the CFO for your project unless I know how it affects my corporation. Your business unit, your division, is not going to distribute that funding within the cash that they get from me as the CFO if your project doesn't make sense. And at the corporate level, I as the CFO have to go to my bankers, whether they're shareholders, whether they're investment bankers, whether they're commercial bankers, in order to get that money. So the way we think about it also as CFOs is the relationship drives downward. So let's take a look at the beginning of this. Project level. And we're going to do a manufacturing example here so you can have a takeaway from today's meeting. And so the first one is on a manufacturing level, we've got a project. We've got manufacturing downtime. We don't have an optimized factory or manufacturing situation. What is your responsibility? So your responsibility at the project level that differentiates you. Again, we always talk about how do you become 5 to 10% of the people who show up that I consider to be valuable, that I think about as partners. And so at the project level, the way you differentiate yourself is you have a great reference success. You're able to talk to me around that and how that reference success can affect my project. At the business unit, you're going to talk to me about where the change is. And in this case, it is a supply chain. It's logistics. It's an inventory problem, which has been preventing us from having full inventory available, thus causing manufacturing downtime. And at the corporate level, the result of that is cash flow. Because what has happened is we have manufacturing that is working because our supply chain is firing on all cylinders, and thus we have cash flow. We don't have excess inventory drawing it down, or we don't have stranded assets that are not working. And we found this in our DEF 14A, as many of you are familiar with. So as you look at that triple metric for companies, we also look at it for government agencies. And so let's take the project level for government groups. They've got, and we'll in this case do a revenue and fee enhancement. How do I drive revenue into my state, into my county, into my federal division? Your job is very similar. We now want to take that revenue and fees and we want to move it up into public safety. What are the operational changes and what are the audit committee reports within public safety that you understand that you can link down to your project? And at the corporate level, the agency, the executive level, departmental level, what are they looking for? What they're looking for is the regulatory and compliance. So in public testimony or open CRS, GAO reports, they can be seen as being a driver. How do I know this? Take a look at the post office. Here are the metrics of the post office. They are living through the triple metric. How do you affect them at the project level? How do you affect them at the agency level? How do you affect them such that they can manage costs, that they can grow their revenue? What do you say to me once you understand your product? What do you say to me once you understand your product's benefits? I'm telling you that those are not even show-up stakes anymore. 4 or 5 years ago when we were talking about this, we would talk to you about that was your show-up stakes. Being well-liked by your customer, understanding your company's products and services, and the benefits they drive are show-up stakes. I'm telling you they're not. You literally have got to begin linking to these levels with your discussion to have a show-up stake and a differentiation in our conversation. So let's apply this now to a company. And we'll take PEPSICO. So with PEPSICO, there are metrics everywhere, lots of metrics. And what we know is out of all those metrics, what we have is those that matter. And so we've got management presentations, we've talked about before, and analyst reports. Letter to shareholder gives you a big metrics. They'll give you the 1 or 2 major ones. We know that the proxy will give you the executive compensation. The analyst call will do a lot of the work for you in telling you what the industry metrics are that are specific. So even though you've got lots of metrics, these are the 4 places that you can truly get a handle on what matters to me. And so you can begin to start putting these metrics in place. How do you affect net revenue? How do you affect net revenue at the project level? How does it affect PEPSICO at the drink level, at the Gatorade level? How does it affect them at the corporate level? And if you take a look at some of these metrics, you'll begin to see target growth was 7%, they only hit 5, no prize. Target growth was 10%, only hit 7, no prize. Cash flow turned out to be minus 11%. Although it doesn't state what the goal was, I am positive there's no prize for anyone who basically reduces the amount of cash available coming out of a recession in this day and age and needs to build their business. No prize. How do you help me get that prize? How do you partner with me to get that prize? And what we saw before on the DEF 14A, we now see reflected in the analyst report. And again, they're talking about cash flow. CapEx should be down. Why is CapEx going to be down 10%? Well, guess what? They lost cash last year. What is the best way to not lose cash this year? Don't spend it. If you want to understand cash flow, put $100 in your pocket. Go out tonight. Come back. Look in your pocket. However less dollars you have in your pocket, that's your negative cash flow. Well, it's the same thing with a company. When I go and build out my CapEx, when I build up inventory, when I build up receivables, my cash flow goes down. And when I can do the opposite on those, cash flow goes up. And as you can see, the person is also focusing on EPS as well as cost. How do you link to this? How do you talk to this? When you come in, do you have that triple metric? You know, Jim, when I look at my project, here's what our project can do, and here is the way we've done that before. What that's going to do for your strategic business, your division, your department, is it's going to be able to differentiate itself. It's going to be able to move itself to the front of the line with the CFO around this. What that's going to do for your corporation is the triple metric is obvious. And the best way to find out how to build a triple metric is look for metrics that you find in the DEF 14A, in the analyst report, in the letter to the shareholder, in the industry reports. The more places people talk about it, the more important it is to me and my company. And so what we have is this triple metric alignment. And what becomes real important is that you, at this level, understand the business application of your product. So we talked about before your product and your benefit, how that used to be show-up stakes, and now it's not. Now what we're talking about is your ability at the project level to link your business impact. You're almost translating your business re-engineering, your business process change that your project undertakes at the project level. And then you get a chance to talk about that. So let's take a look at Pepsi. When you talk to them, is it around spare parts? Is it around stocking? Is it around fixed costs? Is it around carrying costs? What are the specifics that your project impacts me at that project level? And then we move up to the business unit. And for many people, this is tough. We have different business units. At Coca-Cola, we would have the Gatorade group. At PEPSICO, they used to have their food group. We have different divisions, SBUs. And for many of you, this might be the toughest place for you to talk to me about, because what we have down here is my success, your success stories before. What we have up here is the ability to find publicly held information. What we need for you to bring is your business knowledge, your personal acumen, in order to talk to me about how you change that. And for Pepsi, pretty interesting. So we're going to talk to the bottling group. Again, one of the SBUs. And what we're looking at here is consolidation of retail customers and the need for more variety. Two things that may seem obvious to you, but for them, these are still critical operations. And by the way, then, this group is also talking about consolidation of plants And you may be talking to this business unit on a regional basis or a business basis. And then we can begin to see how we begin to drive down into manufacturing again. And what starts out as a simple manufacturing issue for a software solution, for the cloud, for an operational, for a product demand, for a resource, for selling me and clean water, works its way all the way up to how do I capture more products in my portfolio. And then you get to the corporate level. Remember, you're building to this level. It all has to link together. Do not talk to me about cost of goods sold here. Do not talk to me about cash flow here, and do not talk to me about revenue. They are not linked together in any stretch of the imagination. Figure out how you can talk to me about manufacturing downtime, which works on reducing my inventory, which drives cash flow. And it doesn't mean you have to get stuck here. You can also talk to me about our throughput, which allows us to generate more bottles in the bottling plant, which allows us to generate more revenue. It's okay, but they're separate conversations. Don't get stuck on a single conversation by confusing it. Don't try to throw all three ideas into one conversation. If you have great ideas, I'll sit still. I'll extend that 5 to 15-minute meeting to 15 to 30 minutes. I will book some other time for you so that we can talk about cash flow here, revenue here, and maybe cost of goods here. But I need for you to be able to understand my business. You know, one of the things that fascinated me, we were recently working on Coke, was they have a metric called case units. They literally get measured based on the number of cases shipped. And when you think about it, in some ways, this drives everything here, or this is the result of everything here. Without cases, you don't have income revenue, you don't have cash flow, you don't have ROIC. So again, when we look at the Coke bottlers, they have similar ones, cash flow and revenue obviously, but they also have a metric called cases bottled. How do you link to that? How does your project affect that? How do you impact it at the corporate level? And so as we end this time period before the question and answers, a couple of things you need to talk about. Did net revenue or gross margins decline? How did costs do relative to the other metrics? How did things change relative to revenue? How did cash flow grow compared to other ideas? And so what we have is the project, the business unit, and the corporate. And here is your conversation. Look, what we do here is we cover an awful lot of information in a very short period of time. And I recognize that sometimes it can be hard. We keep reinforcing it. We've got our blog at Buyer Talk. We've got executive conversation at LinkedIn. And again, you can follow us, and hopefully you've Twittered this out to your friends. You can follow us on any number of places. But the important thing for you on a personal level, the important thing for you is for you to change to speaking business. If you're on this call, you're either a salesperson, you're either in marketing, you're either in learning and development, you're the core of a company. Even as a CFO, I know that nothing happens until a sale is made. Hard for me to believe as a CFO, I am not the center of the universe, but it only took about 15 to 20 years of working with my companies to realize that nothing happens until a sale is made. And you've got to speak business as you make those sales. We've got an opportunity coming up It is going to be around new opportunities for the coming year. But what's going to make this one so critically different is you're going to get to guide it. And so you've got roughly 30 days to send your questions. And I would say do it in the next 20 so I have a chance to spend a little time on them. To info@conversation.com. What are you looking for? Are you looking for how CFOs and CEOs see the European situation relative to your global sale? Are you looking for what's going on in China? Are you looking for the U.S. recession? Are you looking for what is the impact of either Obama or Romney going to be on? And maybe you've got specific questions on how do I talk to a vice president, or how do I move from my purchasing agent where I just can't get around up to talk to the vice president. And I want to thank you so much for today. I'm going to turn it back to Eric. We usually have a ton of questions. Hopefully we'll be able to get a few of them done.
Jim, thank you again for a very informative presentation. And again, the year-end special that we have coming up on December 6th is the time of year where you, the audience, really drive the topics that we cover there. So info@conversation.com is the email address where we encourage you to send in your questions, and we'll address as many of those as we can with the panel of experts that we'll be assembling for this special year-end presentation. In looking at a number of the questions that came in specific to today's session, Jim, a lot circled around the general topic of transparency and our customer-specific metrics, for lack of a better word, secret sauce, or something that are kept confidentially, or something that if you were asked what are the metrics that are on your dashboard, would you openly share those with a sales professional?
You know, it's a simple and a complex question. The simple portion of it is, if I'm publicly held, I probably have 4 metrics at the most that I focus on. Those 4 metrics I will trumpet far and wide for 3 basic reasons. 1, I'm getting paid on them. 2, more importantly, my share price is going to be determined upon them. I spend a lot of time convincing analysts that cash flow or number of cases shipped or ability to keep inventory low is critical. The analyst then writes a report. We're looking forward to the cash flow for this organization. When I miss those targets, my shares go down. My shareholders are unimpressed, and I get to be seen as the next CFO or a CEO. So the second reason is that I put a lot of effort into it, and a lot of people measure that. The third reason why those are measured and seen so overtly is they tend to be what our industry can do well. We're obviously not going to put technology innovation into Pepsi like we are into a software company. So that's the easy part. The hard part is that we may have the metrics that drive those. In other words, we'll call them sub-metrics that drive them. So one year we might be focusing on collecting receivables more to drive cash flow. Another year we might be focusing on reducing inventory to drive cash flow. If you can talk to me about all of the business metrics coming up to that, and then your question is, which of the sub-metrics are you looking to focus on? Absolutely, I'll share them with you. But don't expect to walk in and in the first 5 minutes say, so is it inventory or receivables that are important to you? You haven't earned it.
Thanks, Jim. Another question pertains to applying the triple metric model to specific accounts. And a number of questions pertain to, for example, the healthcare space. Early on, you cited the metric of error rates relative to the healthcare industry. Questions around, is that a business unit metric, a hospital level type metric? Where would you see that playing in that triple metric hierarchy?
Error rates are a project level, so they're the first level. The error is made in the what we'll call the basic health care provided to an individual, whether it's in the operating room, whether it's post with TSIs, whether it's the cubitus ulcers, whatever it is. At the division level, which is in many ways the hospital level, the SBU level, at that level, we're talking about now revenue and revenue growth. At the corporate level, which could be the HCA, it could be the Adventist, it could be any one of the parent companies. At that point, they're looking for revenue growth as a function of both internal, go all the way back to the project. Did I collect money for that procedure? Did that hospital gain a good reputation so it's growing? All the way up to, at the corporate, that plus other hospitals I'm acquiring because I'm seen as a high-quality hospital that produces good outcomes. So it's at the project level, but it definitely goes all the way up to the top.
Thanks, Jim. We talked about using as a means of quantifying the business change a solution delivers, prompted the question, how frequently do metrics change, or are metrics a relatively stable part of an executive's dashboard?
We change every 4 years unless there is some, what I would call, sweeping issue. The tsunami which hits the nuclear power industry in Japan, a sweeping issue. Those would be the types of things. Other than that, we run fairly large ships, aircraft carriers as they are. And as a result of that, it's tough to get those things to turn. So 3 to 4 years easily is where the 4 will stick together. We may change one in and out every couple of 2 to 3 years, but as an example, if you look at Hewlett-Packard, return on assets for over a decade continued to be their overriding issue until they could change their business model to match the ability to get technology out as quickly as their competitors were and reduce their inventory. So I've seen metrics last decade or more. 3 to 4 years is the average before we fiddle with them.
Okay. We've bumped up at the top of the hour. We'll take 2 final questions here. The first around, can you cite an example or some guidance around incorporating or using events late in the sales cycle as a trigger event to make a purchase decision? Where might that play into that closing the deal conversation?
I'm not quite sure I get the question. Give me an example of what the trigger event would be.
Let's pass on that one. I was a little bit shaky on that. The last one then around a number of folks talking about decision makers that aren't at the very senior level within an organization, but somewhere in that mid-management level. An example was cited as somebody responsible for managing a region. What are some guidance points we can offer to understand the metrics relevant to individuals in those capacities?
Okay, great. That's a great question. Hey, first of all, the project level is the buyer. So we didn't talk about this, and again, we didn't have enough time, but at the project level, you're really talking about the buyer in the sense of the person who is going to have the effect. So in other words, it can be R&D. You may be talking to IT. They're not the project level buyer. The project level buyer is somebody in the lab, or there's somebody in the ER, or there's somebody in manufacturing. And so as you get to talk to these regional people, you need to determine where are they. Are they the buyer? In other words, are they the ones who are going to utilize it? That's the project level. The business unit level are the people who are going to be held responsible for the results of your project and others that transform into a measurable number. They are the Southeast bottlers. And as a result of that, they are going to be measured against their bottling requirements. Or they are the hospital in Newark that is going to roll up into the Northeast hospital group. So those people traditionally, again, if they're not the buyer, the people who are going to be impacted on it, if they have the metric, then they are sitting there at that SBU level, and as such are responsible for that plus other related projects, a great way for you to have a wider, broader, and higher conversation.
Jim, thank you. You covered an awful lot of territory in a short period of time. And again, everyone, December 6th, please put on your calendar as our next special year-end webinar. This one is one driven by you. info@conversation.com is the email address to send in your questions and make sure the topics of concern that impact your bottom line in 2013 get addressed. Thank you for attending. This concludes today's session.